allocation season is upon us, and for many folks, allocation drops have already started occurring, and the crazy stuff is starting to show up. But not everyone can be lucky enough to pick up a BTAC bottle or a Pappy at a reasonable price. So if you can't find one of those true unicorns, which of these things that are more easily acquirable should you hunt for? Bentley here, and I've been pretty fortunate over the years to collect number of different things that I really love. And every year in allocation season, which comes very late to Washington, we're like the last people to get anything. So like BTAC hasn't even shown up here as an example, or Pappy, or any of those crazy things. And to be honest with you, I've never found one at a reasonable price. I've seen them at museum prices that are like more than secondary, but For people like me, you know, when allocation season comes and some of these other harder to find things like E.H. Taylor barrel proofs or some of the stags, maybe some of the Four Roses LEs, a Willet purple top start to show up, the real question becomes, which ones are actually worth picking up, assuming that you can't find everything at MSRP, because most of us aren't that lucky. Now, for those of you in price-controlled states, maybe you have drops, and we can start talking about, like, well, if I'm not super high up in the line, what should I start looking at? Because, you know, the CYPBs or some of the other really crazy things start disappearing fast, and we're left with some of the other things that are a little more common, but still not that easy to find. I want to go through a number of different products that I've kind of gathered here at my temporary desk while I'm still slowly altering my background and figuring out what I want to do. You know, whatever. I kind of go distillery to distillery among some of the things that I personally would look at depending on your personal budget. We'll start with the most obvious one, Buffalo Trace. BTAC is the thing that everybody hunts for, right? Or Pappy. One of the two. But not all of us are going to just walk into a store and find George T. Stags and Pappy 15s and all that kind of stuff at MSRP. In fact, most of us have never seen one at MSRP or even close to a reasonable price point for a bottle of whiskey. So that's where I would say start looking for different things. Now, if you prefer your higher proof, you're a bit of a proof for, you're probably going to start hunting Stag or maybe E.H. Taylor barrel proof. But I think there's an important difference between these two. E.H. Taylor barrel proof is really released only once a year, but sometimes there's kind of like two waves of it through the year, whereas Stag, we get multiple releases a year. We already know that for 2025, there are an A, B, and C batch, and there's potentially another batch on the way, but we don't know whether that's 26A or a 25D. Who knows? There were 4 batches last year, and they're all coming really close to each other. This is what I would say is the delineator between these two. If you want something that is really in your face, and typically 2 to 3 big notes and a few other things going on underneath it that are more subdued, probably want something like a Stag. Also, in general, Stag is a bit more easy to acquire and a little more often can be found at a more reasonable price. National level secondaries at this point is about $150 for a bottle of Stag, so don't pay more than that. I know, for some of you, you might be in a place where you never see a Stag, and the only times you see them, they're like $300, and if you see it an opportunity for like $200, like that's $100 cheaper than I've ever seen. Unless you're doing fairly well for yourself, I don't think $200 is a reasonable price point for Stag anymore. There's just so many batches coming out, and compared to some of the older batches, there's a lot of people that have generally aligned that the quality is not as good as it used to be back in like batch 12, batch 15 kind of era for Stag. So because there's so much more, don't overpay for it. If you can find one for about $100, I feel like that's pretty fair, but once you start getting too much more above that, like I said, national secondary is usually something like $150. Even then, I don't know that I'm personally going to advise anyone to spend that much money when there's so many other things you can find that are even more common less than that. So that's going to take us over to E.H. Taylor. E.H. Taylor barrel proof, very frequently there's not a lot of it. And the MSRP on it is I think like $105 to $115. It kind of depends on your state. The MSRP is not crazy on this considering how infrequent it comes out and the quality of whiskey you're getting. I feel like E.H. Taylor is something you don't get like 2 to 3 big punchy notes. You kind of get 4 or 5 more balanced notes out of an E.H. Taylor barrel proof. I don't feel like you're regularly getting just like really aggressively punched in the face like you are with a Stag. It's a little more refined and balanced. If you like really big in-your-face flavor, you want that kind of like Mike Tyson boxing punch in the face. E.H. Taylor might not bring that for you, and then you might kind of steer into other products. Again, secondary on these is like $225 to $250 now, so if you're seeing it for more than about $200, I would probably pass. Unless you've never had one, and you're gonna be like me, where like you really only drink these on special occasions. And that's kind of your special occasion bottle. And then I could see picking up one where you're going to have it maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times a year. Like you get a promotion, your anniversary, your birthday, something like that, right? I think it's a good pour for that, especially as a barrel-proof product. Beyond that, like, regular small batch is becoming really, really available. In many states, this is just sitting around on shelves for many days at a time instead of evaporating inside of minutes. And even the single barrel is becoming easier to find, and the price is steadily coming down. I think, if I remember correctly, the like full price of a single barrel is supposed to be something like $85 for a bottle. I know that some of these MSRPs have changed recently, but the last time I picked some up, it cost me just shy of about $95 after taxes, and Washington has historically well-known expensive taxes, so it's a little cheaper, but I feel like the difference here is if you want something that's more caramel forward, small batch. If you want something that's more fruit forward, look at the single barrels. Now granted, they're a single barrel and everyone is a little different, but in my experience, I've had a number of single barrels between friends, between my own bottles, between some picks. I tend to see more fruit notes in single barrel and more of a traditional like caramel, vanilla flavored profile out of small batch. So that's a lot of mash bill too. Now you can also do Blantons. Regular Blantons is becoming very easy to find. They're kind of sitting around a lot more. And honestly, I think it's because the MSRP has just gotten too expensive on them. Same with like the gold and maybe straight from the barrel. Straight from the barrel might be the only one where if you get it at a reasonable price, say sub $200, but even I don't really like the price on it. That's probably the one that's worth it. Golds are getting fairly expensive. They're like $150 plus, and I just don't feel like they're worth that much considering they're 103 proof. And while their flavor is a lot better than standard Blantons, I just don't feel like they're worth it. Unless you want to have one because you've never had one and you want a kind of a showy bottle, I can understand that. But I'm going to say, if you're not finding E.H. Taylors, which are more findable, and then something like a Stag, you might look into the Wellers. Weller is a wheated bourbon, so we're going to have a slightly different profile. It's going to be a little softer, a little less in your face, should have more fruit notes. And between the three more allocated ones, we're not talking CYPB, we're not talking single barrel. Those typically are very hard to find. And honestly, at their proof points, they're not as good if you were to ask me. I would rather have a Weller 107 than a CYPB. Personal taste, and I've had some single barrels, I've had some that were great, and others that were just blah. So let's talk Weller 12, Weller 107, Weller Full Proof. If you prefer a much more relaxed sip, you're not a high proof person, and you like a more oak influenced and maybe kind of honey forward profile, I would look at Weller 12. Thankfully, the MSRP on these is fairly cheap in the grand scheme of things. They're like a $60 bottle. Secondary on them is still like $130 to $150 depending on where you look, but I would say at secondary it's not worth it. If you can get it under $100 after all your taxes and all said and done, having one is kind of nice if you want a relaxed, easier pour. But I would say you're much better off flavor-wise with Weller 107 than the Weller 12. Weller 107, again, 107 proof. There's a lot more of these available typically in most states, and to kick it all off, it's like the same price. MSRP's gone up a little bit. I think it's like $5 more than a Weller 12. I think you get so much more flavor out of Weller 107, and the secondary price caps at basically $100. You can find these regularly for $90 to $100 in secondary, and at that price, I would much rather have a Weller 107 than the Weller 12. Now, the last one of the findable ones in the Weller line is Weller Full Proof. Weller Full Proof has the most expensive MSRP. It's like $85 or so. So very similar to our E.H. Taylor single barrel, but you have 114 proof, which is the proof it goes into the barrel at, and you get a little bit of extra flavor. Sometimes it can drink a little hot compared to the 107, but the flavor you're getting, if you get it close to MSRP, is worth it if you were to ask me personally. Secondary on these caps out at about $150, so don't pay more than that. If you see somebody charging $200 or $300 for a Weller Full Proof, walk the heck away. If you find it for like $120 all in, that's not too bad compared to MSRP, and it might be worth picking up. I'd say anytime you can pick up a bottle generally for like $10 to $20 over its MSRP, that's a reasonable pickup, if you were to ask me. Let's get into the non-Buffalo Trace stuff. We'll start over with our friend Russell's 13. Russell's 13 has kind of constantly gone up in MSRP. I think right now the current MSRP is like $165 or $150. It's a lot. But this year's batch, there's quite a bit more of it that's been floating around, and if you can find some of the older ones especially, they bring a lovely like cherry forward profile out of what is wild turkey juice. The batch 6 is a bit more spice forward in its profile, so if you like that kind of turkey spice and you want something a little higher proof, the traditional proof point of all the previous ones was like I think it's 113.2, something like that. It's not super high, but the newest one, batch 6, is the highest released turkey product, well, Russell's product, ever. So if you want something that's a bit more proofy, you like that in-your-face profile, but it's not giving you a lot of ethanol burn because that age mellows out that ethanol and just gives you lots of flavor. Russell's 13, I think, is probably the best, we'll put this in quotation marks, turkey product to go hunting. A lot of people will probably be like, What about Master's Keep? I think they're overpriced. I think they're all very overpriced. I own a Beacon. I think it's phenomenal juice. And I think if you wanted a true like celebratory pour and you're a really big Wild Turkey fan, maybe Beacon is worth it at its $300 MSRP. But once you get past that, I'm sorry. I think the secondary prices are ridiculous on those things. I've seen some people going really crazy for it in them, but I don't think they're worth it. Similarly, I think the Russell's Reserve single rick houses, where their base MSRP is $300, is probably just a little too much unless you're a massive Wild Turkey fan and you don't mind spending on an occasionally fairly expensive bottle. I think, honestly, your best bet is if you can find one of these close to MSRP, don't pay more than like $200 on these. Just don't. If you can find a Wild Turkey 12, and there are a number of places that bring them in, imported from Japan, and make them available in the United States, I would look at one of those. Well, yes, it's only 101 proof, that 12-year age statement brings a lot of extra flavor and complexity, plus it comes in that super cool purple box. It looks amazing, it has a great presentation, looks great on a shelf, all those kind of things. It is phenomenal whiskey, and it's a lot less expensive. I've seen some places that sell it for only about $100 plus shipping, and at that point, I think it's as worthy a pickup as something like a Weller 107. Now, what if we go outside of Wild Turkey? What if we kind of go to like, say, Four Roses and their LEs? Outside of like the 135th anniversary, which I have here, this is the only one I own. I've been very lucky that I got this one. I've had a number of them. I've had, I think, 6 or 7 different years of the LEs, and every time I'm like, that's good Four Roses, but I feel like I would rather just pay for a barrel strength pick at a store. And if I feel like that every time, because the price point on these things is fairly expensive, they're like $300, then they're not worth it. I will say, if you can find the 135th anniversary version close to its MSRP, or even like upwards of $250, to me that's worth it. This is a really, really, really good one, but most of the rest of them, I don't feel punch that kind of level, and I would rather have a single barrel pick, especially if I can find one that's like that 9 to 10 year point, maybe even a little older than that. That's where we start getting some really great flavor, and I would just rather buy one of those, and they're way more available. So for Four Roses, unless you're a massive Four Roses fan and this is like the one thing you chase every year, skip the LEs, stick to the regular barrel proof picks. Michter's, one of my personal favorites. This is probably like my actual favorite distillery as far as profile is concerned. And I have a personal goal of I try to get one Michter's 10 bourbon every year. I've been lucky enough to do that for the last 3 years. These things are expensive. MSRP puts them at like $220 in my state after taxes, and very frequently you don't see these for any less than about $300. However, this is what I will say about Michter's 10 bourbon, and you can say pretty similar about the Michter's 10 rye. Especially for people that aren't regular bourbon drinkers, despite the fact that it's low proof, you'll get a lot of people who don't really like other bourbons, but will like the 10-year Michter's products. Because for some magical voodoo reason, Michter's is really good at extracting a ridiculous amount of flavor in low-proof whiskey. I honestly think they are the absolute masters of low-proof whiskey. So with that being said, if you can find one close to MSRP, maybe you're going to Kentucky and you can see one of the bundles, might be worth picking up. There's a lot more flavor than the proof is telling you, and that is one of the beauties of Michter's. This is one of my favorite bottles to go to every year. You can see I've been like really conservative on this one that I got earlier in the year because I don't want to run out, and I really, really like this bottle a lot. So like as an example, if I'm having some special occasion pours, Michter's 10 is almost always my warm-up pour, because that low proof has so much flavor and it kind of sets the bar for a special night. But if you don't like Michter's products, probably avoid it. Now there's other things like the toasteds and the barrel strengths and all those kind of things. Those aren't as widely distributed, they're a little harder to find, but if you can find like a barrel strength rye, toasted barrel strength rye, and you're a rye drinker, those are some of the best ryes you're ever going to have in your life. The toasted bourbon and toasted sour mash, they're both lower proof, and I would say unless you're kind of a big Michter's fan, they might not be up your alley. You might not get enough for the cost increase compared to the standard bottle. But if you ever get a chance to get a barrel strength bourbon, it's really freaking good. And the unfortunate part is they're basically Kentucky only. So if you can find one, cool, but I wouldn't pay much more than about their MSRP, which I think is about $135 or so. And that's after like Washington taxes. So just keep that in mind. Once you get to like 135 plus taxes, they're probably not worth it. And there's some other things that you can get that are going to be more enjoyable for the price point. Jack Daniels. Now I have the 14-year. This bottle's ridiculous. If you can find this at MSRP, buy 4 or 5 of them and send me 3. All right. Seriously, but a lot of the Jack Daniel's limited products. Maybe you're looking for not the Coy Hill, but the Tenured Hill Rye that just came out. It looks very similar to this. It's just got a little green stripe at the top, but not everybody's going to find a Coy Hill at a reasonable price. Maybe you're looking for one of those. Maybe you're looking for a Jack 10, Jack 12, Jack 14, any of the age-stated products, or some of the other just really good, like even some of the single barrel strength picks. The Jack just always is phenomenal at its MSRP. Now, some of the secondary values are getting a little nuts on some of them. The Jack 14, the Coy Hill, and the Tenured Hill Rye, they have some nutso secondary values. And I would say, I don't think any of them are worth that. If you get an opportunity to get something like a Jack 10 around $100, $110, a Jack 12 somewhere between $120, maybe $130, or closer to its MSRP where it's actually about $100, those are all worthwhile buys. They're just really, really good juice. And they make a phenomenal like special pour, whether it's your Friday pour, maybe your once a month pour, whatever that may be. They are really, really good, especially if you're a fan of the Jack Daniel's profile. But if you can get the single barrel strengths, whether it's the rye or the regular bourbon, yes, it's a bourbon. Let's not, come on. Just because it has a different filtering process doesn't mean it's not a bourbon. It follows every other rule. It just has one added step that isn't a finish. Let's chill, right? Whatever. Tennessee whiskey. Anyway, if you can find those regularly, they're so good. The only difference tends to be the length in which they're aged. So, don't stress too much about those. The last one I'll get into is going to be some of your, like, other Michter's products, like Bombergers. They're interesting, but I feel like their price is getting a little too high. But if you've never had one, having one is kind of fun. Willet Purple Tops in Maker's Mark, let's just say cellar aged. I've got one over here. I know it's off camera, but whoop. This is my 2024 cellar age. I've heard the 2025 is pretty dang good, but here's what I'll say about these. I feel like the MSRP is about as much as it is worth on cellar age, and when it comes to purple tops, often these are just so ludicrously expensive, unless you are really dedicated to these particular things as your one special find. I don't think they're worth it. I really don't. Now, I have this one here, and it's a special case, and we'll have a whole separate video about that. But I don't think they're worth it when you can go and get something like this. The Murray Hill Club special release that comes out of Joseph Magnus. Now here's what's interesting. This one in particular, the Batch 4, has high age, basically put Four Roses juice in it. It's the exact same yeast strain and mash bill as Four Roses, but it's done a bunch of finishing. So things like the Cigar Blend and the Murray Hill, especially the more recent ones where Nancy Fraley has come back in and really taken the reins on these projects, the quality is really high. I have ranted and raved about the Calvados finish, and now it has this amazing, jammy, delicious sweetness going on in it in the Murray Hill Special Release Batch 4. I love that bottle. I have a couple of backups of it because I like it so much, I want to make sure I just have them for a very long time. And I think if you're going to start talking $200+ bottles, these are far more worth it than 90% of these that I've ever had. Most of these, if you were to ask me, taste very, very grassy, and until you get to the really old, sourced Willet Purple Tops that are excessively expensive, we're talking $1,000+ a bottle, they're never worth it. And then at that point, they're so expensive, they're not worth it. So if you were to ask me, I would look at some of the nicer Joseph Magnus, maybe even some of the nicer Penelopes, the Omega, the Founders. Those are just phenomenal. And then we're not even talking about Heaven Hill juice. There are so many Heaven Hills, I just don't have a ton of them. They're very hard for me to get. Parker's, Heaven Hill Heritage, I basically can't get those. Just can't. Old Fits, I don't have any of the decanters. None of them I've had samples. They're okay, but I always feel like they're overpriced for what they are. I would rather get a more baseline Heaven Hill product or some of the picks that are out there from Heaven Hill, like Elijah Craig picks. Elijah Craig picks are amazing. They're almost always amazing. I don't think it's worth spending $400 to go get the upgrades like the Heaven Hill Heritages, or, we don't get William Heaven Hill out here, so I can't do those. Those kind of things just never feel worth it. The last one I don't have represented here is Old Forester, and that is just because most of the best parts of Old Forester are Black Label store picks. There's President's Choice that doesn't really filter around, and then there's Birthday Bourbon. That's always so expensive and almost impossible to find. It's basically BTAC, and it's going to follow the same rules. You're not finding that, skip it. Just go get a bottle of 1920. Maybe you'll be lucky and find a 1924, and you can have what I love to call Prince of Kentucky. It's not too bad. It's actually pretty delicious juice. It's just very different than the standard Old Forester profile. So there you go. There are my thoughts on allocation season and the things that you should actually hunt. If it were me, what would be the number one bottle I would hunt in an allocation season? E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. I'm very biased. This is probably my favorite Buffalo Trace product, period. Yeah, I said period, right? I know, crazy. I've had some of the BTACs, and I tend to appreciate these more, especially because they're price point, than I do the BTACs. Plus, I can actually find these. I can't find BTAC. If I was going to go something else, I love some of the aged Jack Daniel's products, like the 10s and the 14 are phenomenal. It's a little more expensive, but like Michter's 10 is my other super favorite bottle that I hunt every year. And of all the other things I have on this table, plus other things I can think of, is there something I really, really chase that I just think is worth having one of, if you can get it? Probably a Russell's 13. There's not a lot of Heaven Hill products that I would really go gaga for. I'm just going to be honest. They have a lot of cool stuff, but most of the best stuff is exclusive to the distillery, and you're not getting that unless you're in Kentucky. I hope you've enjoyed this video. What is your favorite Allocation season bottle? And don't do BTAC. Not everyone can find that stuff. Let's not be dumb about it. Come on. But like, we start talking to more regularly findable things. Maybe it's Jack 10s, maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's a Weller Full Proof. Let me know in the comments down below. What's your favorite one to pick up, especially if you start talking not MSRP, but close to MSRP. It's a little inflated, but nothing too crazy, not full secondary. Or maybe there is one that you're willing to always pay full secondary for if your bottle is currently out. I want to hear from you in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I know it's a little different than our usual 2-Minute Tuesday, but I kind of wanted to do something a little different because of the current season we're in. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, because at 1,000 subscribers, I'm giving away an E.H. Taylor single barrel, probably a small batch, and a few other things. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.